Welcome, Compassionites. Our special spiritual guest today is Barbara Gardner. She's the founder of the Animal Interfaith Alliance, which has been alluded to several times already. She is also the author of The Compassionate Animal, an interfaith guide to including animals in our circle of compassion. And she's won all sorts of cool awards. The Shining World Compassion Award by Supreme Master TV, and a Queen Victoria Silver Medal for long and meritorious service to animal welfare. Now, for an Anglophile like me, somebody that's won the Queen Victoria anything has to be so astoundingly cool. And not only that, Barbara Gardner actually is in the UK, where it's very late. So thank you extra, Barbara, for being with us this evening.
Well, thank you. I feel so honoured to have been invited here. I mean, I think the work you do is so wonderful and inspiring that, such an honour to be part of it.
Well, it's always wonderful to work with you, Barbara, as we did last summer with the World Parliament of Religions. But I was thinking today, as I was reading your bio and everything, of how our paths a little bit geographically crossed at an earlier point in history. So when you were 5 years old, I was 18, and I was living in London, where I discovered Quakers and spiritualists and an esoteric bookshop called Watkins. I discovered yoga. I became a vegetarian. And it seemed to me that all that could have only happened in England. And you were born there. You were growing up there. So tell us a little bit about what it's like to be you in a country that has such a long history of animal rights, vegetarianism, and veganism.
Well, um, yes, I mean, certainly the RSPCA is celebrating its 200th anniversary this year, and it was set up in 1824. It's unbelievable to think that by people such as William Wilberforce, that the people who were fighting to abolish slavery were also fighting for animal rights. So yes, 200 years of that. They started off as the Society for the Protection of Animals or Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And yes, Queen Victoria came along and she gave them her royal assent, and they became the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. So yes, it's lovely to have that history, behind us, and so much to build on. And this year they've launched a new brand to care for all kinds of animals. Um, People often associate them with caring for cats and dogs, perhaps rabbits, but mainly companion animals. And they're really pushing out to consider all animals, including farm animals, who we have overlooked, I think, in all of our countries.
Yeah, I think that's happening here as well. I remember going to events for large animal welfare organizations in decades past, and the dinner choices would be chicken or beef. And those days are long gone. So we're making tremendous progress. So let's just talk about your progress, Barbara. I'm fascinated by your life and your personal trajectory. And you found the religions of the world before you tied spirituality to animal welfare and animal rights. So tell us your story.
Well, I mean, I was brought up as in the Church of England tradition, as people generally are in the UK, and didn't know much about any other faith. And it was only later reading about them that I thought, well, hang on, these aren't in competition. They've got a lot in common. They share so much, particularly the golden rule, to treat others as you wish to be treated yourself. And thank you very much for playing the Golden Rule song. It's lovely to see it, but getting out there and being played and see all those smiles. Um, but yes, it was only later I realized that there were all these other faiths, and actually they all have this underlying theme in common, this a divinity that runs through all life, which Reverend William mentioned when he talked about your your wording this earlier this evening.
Tell us about your personal spiritual path today. Do you still identify as Church of England? And for those of us who don't know much about England, what's the belief system? What's the theology you came from?
Well, the Church of England is basically Christianity, but Henry VIII decided that he wanted to have his own faith, an Anglican faith, when he left the Catholic Church, when he fell out with the Pope over his divorce a very long time ago, and we've still got the Church of England. But basically, everybody uses the same book, whether you're Catholic, Quaker. It's the same Bible. So yes, that's what the tradition I was brought up in, but also finding out later about Buddhism, Jainism, Taoism. People think they're very different, but there's so much in common.
And it's so interesting to me, Barbara, that you and I, and probably everybody in this Zoom room, sees that there is an interconnection between faith traditions, personal spirituality, and the treatment of animals, coexisting with animals and changing things for animals on this planet. And yet, I think the prevailing attitude, probably in the animal rights movement, is to hell with religions, because they have ignored the animals and now we're going to ignore them. But obviously, you with the Animal Interfaith Alliance see that differently. So tell us about your view.
Well, I have some sympathy with people who think that, because very often it's been the church that's been very anthropocentric. Humans are made in God's image and nothing else is. And that's been a tradition which I don't think came from the original teachings. And I think this is true of all faiths. A lot of the original teachings have been forgotten, and a large amount of anthropocentrism has been put over those religions, which is what people outside of faith see and obviously feel frustrated by. But I think, it's our duty to inform people that actually that's not how the original faiths were based. It's been a misinterpretation.
So tell us about some of your member organizations in the Animal Interfaith Alliance. It's almost like you've got the United Nations of spiritual animal advocates in your organization. So tell us about some members that maybe surprised you that they're there, or people who said things that surprised you to hear. Let us in on some of the inner circle stuff.
Well, we've got one absolutely fantastic member called the Compassion Consortium, who we're absolutely delighted to have as a member. We've also got Veganism in Education, who made that film we saw earlier. And you might think, well, they're not a faith or a religion, but they do represent a worldview. And veganism is now considered to be a worldview, certainly in the UK and in European law. And in the religious education teaching now that is happening in the UK, or at least in England and Wales, they're looking at religions and worldviews. So it's not just the traditional faiths. And so it now includes humanism and veganism as a worldview. So we're really working on that with our religious education resources.
That is really exciting. So, for Americans and others who are not aware of this, can you tell us what happened in the UK? So, my understanding is now that veganism there is a protected class. That if you're in a nursing home or in the military and you need vegan food or vegan shoes, you have a right to have that just as much as something that was stipulated by a religion would be required.
That's absolutely right. And we had the 2010 Equality Act, which said that you know, veganism and these worldviews must be sort of respected and taken into account.
Wow. I just wish that the immigration laws had been that I would have stayed. That it's such an amazing place to me, but I know we have to make magic wherever we are. And some of the magic that you made is founding a major international animal rights organization. I mean, I mean, did you just wake up one day and say, "Oh, I want to do something spectacular"?
Not well, it wasn't quite like that. I just saw shall we say, a gap in the market. I mean, there was a number of animal advocacy organisations for different faiths. So, for example, the Anglican Society for Animal Welfare, Catholic Concern for Animals, the Jewish Vegetarian Society, and they were all working within their own faiths, quite rightly too. But I just felt if we all got together, we'd be a stronger voice for animals, particularly when it comes to campaigning and political lobbying. I mean, if you say to a politician, you know, this is an interfaith view that we should treat animals in such a way, I think they respect it because there is a concern that we should be aware of faiths and of diversity and interfaith.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And there's so many amazing people around you. So, of all the issues, which ones do you see most unite animal advocates who are also people of faith?
I think, well, I mean, anything to do with protecting animals. Obviously, veganism is a major subject because so many animals suffer in the food industry, but other areas such as laboratory research on animals, animals in entertainment, certainly. In fact, one area, somebody said to me when I first set up AIA, said, oh, you'll never get people to agree because you've got issues like slaughter and slaughtering animals. And some people say they should be stunned, and some people say they shouldn't be stunned. And I said, well, actually, we do agree because we don't agree with slaughter at all. You know, um, we believe in not eating animals, so this isn't an issue, which kind of surprised them.
I love that. What an interesting idea that when we're talking with somebody and there's controversy over a halfway point, to just say, well, let's go all the way. And then maybe that would take care of everything. I love that idea. So, are there sticking points? Are there some issues that you just avoid, or these that animal people who are part of faith traditions stay away from to keep the peace?
I mean, not with us. I think certainly some individuals might find they wouldn't want to talk about certain issues within their church, and they might feel ostracized if they did. But we try to, you know, talk about these things and not turn away from anything.
So, what advice do you have for people who are part of a church, synagogue, mosque, something or other, and they really want to bring in animals or veganism or something, and they feel that that's not a welcome topic?
That is such a common situation, I know, for so many people, and I think they find a lot of solace in joining organisations. So, for example, if you were a Quaker and you felt like that, you might join Quaker Concern for Animals. So, actually, by joining these individual animal advocacy faith-based groups, people do find a community that they can work in, but it's still difficult when they go back to their own church. And I think all we can say is, you know, if you can find one other person, you know, to within that church to share your ideas with, and then maybe make it grow, just keep at it. Um, and I think this is something you've said, don't sort of argue against eating meat, produce lovely vegan food. And I don't know how many times you've been somewhere and there's a little vegetarian or vegan section, and somehow everybody else wants it because it's it's so tempting.
It is interesting that this is a way of life in the practical sense, the food sense. And it's so interesting that I don't think of not eating animals as being a dietary choice, but the world certainly does. And, you'll say things like, well, I'm vegan. And somebody says, you got to meet my sister. She's gluten free. And it's just so fascinating that bringing it back to the food, as prosaic as that may be, seems to be where we reach people. So, food today, philosophy tomorrow. So, speaking of reaching people through philosophy and religion, the documentary Christspiracy is out there. Have you seen it? And
I
if you have,
have,
what did you
yes.
think?
It's a very impressive documentary, very well researched and produced, and certainly a huge amount of food for thought. So food, but certainly a lot to think about. You know, and they've really done their research, and I think people should take some of the ideas that they've presented seriously and really consider them. Was Jesus a vegetarian? There were groups, Nazarenes. I think it needs some investigation. The producers have done a lot of that investigation, and very interesting.
Well, I love it that we have all of these incredible documentaries. I feel now that if I were going to school, I would try to do one of those create your own major things. And it would just be I'm going to watch every animal rights documentary in existence and form some kind of amazing worldview and write about that. So there is a question from our Zoom deck about family. That is the hardest thing. We want the people we care about most to want this. So, do you have any ideas for helping them want that? Or if they do, uh, hmm, how do we help?
That's a difficult one because I think family, of all people, your family take you the least seriously. So sometimes it helps to have somebody from the outside, somebody who's I don't know, a pop star or some famous person. If you can demonstrate that they like eating vegan food, they're more likely to be impressed by them than by their relative.
Yeah, I think you're right. Ah, for I do pray for the celebrities that once they say they're with us, they stay with us because they can do so much good and so much harm when they leave. So I want to ask you a question that might be for real and might be for fantasy, but do you hold some hope? And if you do, what is it? That some major religion would do something major for the cause of animals. And even if that's just a fantasy, what would it be?
Well, that's an interesting one. I mean, certainly we know the Jains are already there. They already, you know, teach ahimsa and non-harming in any way, and that includes not eating animals. There's not enough of them, unfortunately. So you're looking at something like one of the great Abrahamic religions who have or maybe Buddhism that has the largest number of followers. Buddhism should do it, and many Buddhists are vegan, who do practice their own form of ahimsa and non-harming, but not all of them. And I know that's something that Dharma Voices for Animals is working very hard on to convince Buddhists of the need of not harming animals. So yes, something like that breaking through, I think would be magnificent. If it was the Catholic Church, that
Oh,
would be that
oh,
would be totally transformational.
that would be stunning. I believe it is appropriate to say from your mouth to God's ears. So, AIA's 10th anniversary year And it feels like you guys have been around so much longer because you have all these member organizations. It seems like you've been around forever. But how about 10 years from now, 20th anniversary year? How does the world look for animals?
Well, I'd like to think that things have changed, that people are eating far more plant-based foods. I mean, even if not for the animals, say for the environment, that people can actually learn, or even for their health. Um, there are so many reasons to make that change. But obviously, if people did it because they cared about animals, because there was some sense of compassion there, I think that would be the greatest thing.
Well, let's just envision that. And because this is Mahavira's celebratory day, I'd just like to close first with thanking you, Barbara Gardner, Animal Interfaith Alliance, and then closing with a quotation, my favorite quotation in all the world, which comes from Mahavira, who said, "To every creature, their own life is very dear." Hard to argue with that.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for having me. I'm really humbled and appreciate it. Thank you.
All the best to you, Barbara.